I'll put in a word tomorrow evening at 7. We're having a town hall explaining the new bylaws. Well, specifically the new structure of governance. So we invite all members of the congregation to take advantage and attend what is a forum about congregational democracy, how our synagogue is governed. Hopefully, without the dramatics and pyrotechnics of recent elections. Okay.
There's about 50,000 votes outstanding in Pennsylvania right now, and 20,000 plus have been come to that chart.
I'm gonna mute everybody. You do have the power to unmute yourselves, but just remember, if you have any kind of background noise, radio, blender, microwave, phone, alarm clock, whatever it may be, birds in a cage chirping, it all gets picked up. Zoom is the great sound equalizer. So probably easier if folks stay on mute. And then if you do have a question at any point, just you can raise your hand. There is a little place on your screen, probably where it says more. If you click that on, you can raise your hand, or you can just, go like that. Hopefully I'll see you. Or you could just unmute and, and chime in if you have a question. So yeah, last time out, we looked at our founding fathers, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, our first 3 presidents, explored their relationship to religion, their own religion, their relationships with Jews, if they had, any views or writings that they had about the Jewish community. We saw that the individual who had both the most contact and the most correspondence was Washington. Jefferson had correspondence with Jews, especially after he left office. Adams less so. But we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to go through the presidents of the early to mid 19th century. So we're picking up right around the time of James Madison, the 4th president of the United States. And tonight, hopefully, we'll get all the way through John Tyler, which brings us up to right on the eve of the Mexican-American War. Next time around, we'll go from there and go through to the end of the Lincoln administration, because Lincoln is a very, very interesting figure. But there are also interesting things along the way. So without further ado, we'll jump into the 2 Jameses, James Madison and James Monroe. Madison was a Virginia planter, a slave owner, and a protege of Thomas Jefferson. He was a Democratic Republican. That was the party. I know it sounds today like it's some sort of oxymoron, but you were a Democratic Republican, as opposed to a Federalist. Later, that just became shortened to being the Democratic Party. And in the 1830s, another party came into being, which was the Whigs, W-H-I-G. Now, Madison served 2 terms of office. He was elected in 1808 and re-elected in 1812. His presidency encompasses the War of 1812 and its immediate aftermath. One of the most interesting things, at least from a Jewish perspective, in his administration was a letter written by Mordechai Manuel Noah. I'm going to put his picture up for folks to see. Here we go. Okay. Everybody see that? Hopefully. All right. So Mordechai M. Noah, where it says Ararat, we'll talk a little bit about that later. He had an idea of establishing a Jewish colony in the Niagara River between Buffalo and Canada as a place of refuge for Jews that he called Ararat. If you know your Bible, or you were listening to Parshat Noach 2 weeks ago, Ararat is the name of the mountain where the ark comes to rest. So this is a 2-cent stamp. You probably can guess that it's not a recent stamp. We don't have too many 2-cent stamps. This was issued by the United States Postal Service on the 100th anniversary of Ararat's founding, so 1925. If you go up to Grand Island, New York, might as well just show this to you now. Grand Island is, I don't know, a 25 square mile island in the Niagara River. You go look at a map of Buffalo, you'll see it there. You'll see this is the proposed site of Mordecai H. Noah's attempt to establish a city of refuge for the Jews of the world on 2,555 acres of land in 1825. He actually bought the land. Nothing was built. There is a project that created from some of the plans. It's very interesting. It's a 3D. It's a virtual tour that you can take of Ararat. You can just Google, tours of Ararat, New York, or Grand Island, Ararat, and you'll find it pretty easily. But nothing really came of it. So anyway, back to Mordechai Manuel Noah. He writes to Madison asking for a counselor appointment, right? He points out that members of the Jewish nation would be encouraged by this, and they would want to immigrate to the United States when they saw that a Jew had been asked to serve as a foreign consul, right? Consul, for us today was, for us, well, back then, it really was the equivalent of ambassadorial rank. And that when these Jews from Europe saw how well Jews were regarded in the United States, they would want to come and emigrate and fill up all of these empty spaces, out west. There was a time when immigration was strongly urged and encouraged. And they would come and bring their money too and invest it in the United States. Nothing ever came of this, but in 1813, Secretary of State James Monroe, right, who will become the next president, he does appoint Noah as consul to Tunis, right, Tunisia, Tunis, making this the first full-fledged diplomatic post awarded to a Jewish person. So Noah goes to Tunis. The United States had some, trouble along the North African coast. The Barbary pirates would take merchant ships and, hold them captive and ransom them, the ships, the cargoes, and the citizens of the country, for very high prices. European powers, for the most part, kind of aided and abetted the practice because they paid the ransoms. The United States didn't want to. The U.S. didn't have, as much money, but it was also, a sore point. And so there were wars fought against the Barbary pirates, especially during Thomas Jefferson's administration. So these troubles were happening on and off. And during the time that Noah is the consul in Tunis, he arranges for the ransom of 12 American citizens held captive by Algerian pirates. They were demanding a ransom of $20,000. That was a lot of money in those days. Still, I don't know what it is in our dollars today, but $20,000 even today is a chunk of change. The State Department kind of hung Noah out to dry. At first, they instructed him to give the pirates the money, but to tell them that it was not from the government, that the families had collected the funds. Why? For simple purposes, that you don't want to prime the pump and say, government's going to pay for ransoms, we'll just keep doing it. But after he did this, the State Department reprimanded him, saying that it had never authorized payment of the ransom. It was some sort of bureaucratic mix-up. But to make matters worse, just 2 years after he was appointed to the post, and despite the fact that Noah's Jewish identity was certainly known, he had written Madison in the first place, asking for an appointment, thinking that it would be good if Jews would see a Jewish person appointed as a foreign consul. But he gets a letter from James Monroe, then Secretary of State. This is 1815. Quote, "At the time of your appointment as consul at Tunis, it was not known that the religion you profess would form any obstacle to the exercise of your consular functions. Recent information, however, on which entire reliance may be placed, proves that it would produce a very unfavorable effect, in consequence of which the president, that's Madison, has deemed it expedient to revoke your commission." So he's returned home. His commission is taken away from him. The allegation is he's dealing with a Muslim nation and they wouldn't want to deal with Jews. Now, it's not quite clear really what's going on. Would they want to deal with Christians, right? This is long before the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's not clear what's going on. What does happen is, the proverbial you-know-what hits the fan. Noah is highly offended, as are other prominent American Jews. Isaac Harvey, who's a prominent Southern Jew and editor of a newspaper called the Southern Patriot, is outspoken. He condemns Madison in editorial after editorial, and he writes to Monroe himself a scathing letter. "When was it discovered that religion disqualifies a man from the exercise of his political functions? An objection on the score of religion would sound to the authors of the Constitution most monstrous and unnatural." What's interesting is that American Jews felt very comfortable protesting this. The end result is the State Department admits it was wrong. They apologize to Noah, but he never gets reinstated. He never gets either that consul position back or any other. Madison, however, realizes that he's ruffled some feathers, and he does seek to build a bridge back to Noah. we have some correspondence between the two from 1818. This is already after Madison's presidency. Now, there's one other interesting Jewish figure. We mentioned him last week in connection with Monticello. That's Uriah P. Levy, who was a naval officer, a long and very interesting career in the Navy. So Levy signs up. He is 10 years old and he runs away to sea and he becomes a cabin boy. He's working on coastal ships without his parents' permission. But as the story goes, he returns home after 2 years, just in time for his bar mitzvah. Yes, he returns home for his bar mitzvah. And he didn't even get a catered affair with a theme. But he returns home for his bar mitzvah, after which his parents realize that, you know, his calling is the sea, and they apprentice him as a seaman to one of Philadelphia's leading ship owners. So when the War of 1812 begins, he volunteers because of his experiences at sea. He's already had 10 years of experience at sea. He is commissioned as in June of 1813. It's not an officer's commission. He's a sailing master. But he is given command of a brig, the brig Argus, and he carries the American minister to France safely through the British blockade. Unfortunately, on the way back, he's captured. And he languishes in a British prison for 16 months. But in December of 1814, he's released, and there's a prisoner of war exchange. This is really at the very end of the War of 1812. And he's assigned to duty in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. So about a year and a half later, a drunken lieutenant, this was at apparently there was something called the Patriots Ball that was held in Philadelphia, and you can imagine, you know, you had Navy guys dressed in their uniforms. There was a drunken lieutenant who didn't like Levy or didn't like Jews or both, and kept pushing him and his partner. He did this a whole bunch of times, and then, you know, when he wouldn't stop and Levy asked him, Levy slapped him in the face. So, of course, what do you do in 1816? Somebody slaps you in the face. Of course, you challenge him to a duel. Levy tried to diffuse the situation, was not successful, arguing that, you know, dueling violated naval law, and you could not just, you know, depending on what happened, you could also be court-martialed as well as tried in a civilian court. Make a long story short, the offended lieutenant refuses to accept Levy's hand reaching out to him, insists on a duel, and Levy kills him. So Uriah Phillips Levy shoots this guy dead. Now he has to stand trial, once in a naval court and once in a civilian court. He's acquitted on both times, and on the grounds of self-defense. And in 1817, James Monroe commissions Levy as a lieutenant. It's confirmed by the Senate, right? He's the second Jew to become a U.S. naval officer. The first was a couple months earlier, Levy Charles Harvey. But what's amazing is that this guy just killed, you know, a lieutenant in a duel. He gets acquitted and then gets commissioned, you know, less than a year later. Really hard to imagine that happening today. Different times. We'll see. We'll get back to Levy a couple of times. He faces a lot of trouble in the Navy. People don't like that he's Jewish. And he also doesn't, you know, he doesn't turn the other cheek. Over 11 years, he's court-martialed 5 or 6 times, on some of them on pretty petty charges. because when people made anti-Semitic remarks to him, he responded, and not only verbally. After his second court-martial, he's dismissed from the vessel he commands, but Monroe intervenes personally, right? He looks at the verdict, says that it was way too harsh, and he sets it aside as commander-in-chief. This won't be the only time it happens. We'll see it happens again in Levy's career. We had mentioned also that he was a crusader to ban flogging in the Navy, a little bit more about that later. And as a lifelong admirer of Jefferson, we also mentioned this last week, he purchases Monticello. Jefferson dies with crushing debt, and the estate falls into disrepair. He is the one who buys it and essentially restores it, at least the first time. He also commissioned a statue of Jefferson, which once upon a time stood on the north lawn of the White House. Today, it's in the Capitol, in the rotunda of the Capitol. The statue of Jefferson that Levy commissioned. It is, by the way, the only privately commissioned piece of artwork in the U.S. Capitol. There's a little bit of interesting trivia. So now we're going to just take a little musical break. And I want you to just keep in mind, as we're going to get to John Quincy Adams, bitter election. I'm going to put up on the screen here. Let's see. Do that. Nope. Let's see. Do this. Okay. And where is it? Okay, how do we get this? Right. And I want to do screen share. Right. Let's try this. Hope I can do it. Here we go. All right. Make this bigger. All right. So we think that, dirty elections are something that's, is limited to what we have seen in more recent times. That is not so. This was campaign songs have been around as long as there have been presidential campaigns. This was a popular one for John Quincy Adams, who ran against 3 slaveholders. He was an abolitionist, John Quincy, John Adams' son. But he ran against Andrew Jackson in 1824, Henry Clay, and George Crawford of Georgia. And so if you can see the lyrics, you can look on. And I'm going to play this campaign song. These campaign songs, they were written, it was kind of doggerel. They were written in newspapers or pamphlets, and then people would sing them to popular tunes. Nobody wrote the music, specific music for these campaign tunes. People would sing them to, popular songs of the day. And this is one of them. Whoops.
Ready to connect.
Whoops. I was connected. Hold on. We will be reconnected in just a moment.
Connected.
Here we
Now
go.
it's F10.
Here we go. Okay. Let's see. All right, Here we go.
Little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Fire's coming, swords are coming, pistols, guns, and knives are coming, diamonds coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Slavery's coming, slavery's coming, plunder's coming, wonder's coming, jobbing's coming, rabbit's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Tears are coming, tears are coming, plague and pestilence are coming, Satan's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, if John Quincy not be coming. Little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, little know ye who's coming, if John Quincy not be coming.
I mean, so if you don't elect John Quincy, what do you get? You're going to get fears, tears, plague, and pestilence, hating, Satan, slavery, knavery, plundered, wonders. So, fire's coming, swords are coming, pistols, guns, and knives are coming. So, these are fighting words. And, so clearly the idea of, take off the gloves and, bare knuckled campaigns are not new. We sometimes say, what have we sunk to? Well, it was happening in 1824. Whatever questions there were, 1824 was a very strange election because no one had a majority of electoral votes. So the election has to be decided in the House of Representatives. Now, Jackson had the most votes, but you had to have a majority of the electoral votes to win. Still the case. So there are some charges of machinations, backdoor smoky room deals. Henry Clay, who didn't like Jackson at all, essentially gave his support to John Quincy Adams. Adams had the second highest total after Jackson, and then Clay's, by directing his votes to J.Q. Adams, he had a majority and he won. And then later, John Quincy Adams turns around and appoints Clay as his Secretary of State. So of course, Jackson says, foul, right? He cries foul. Was there, some backroom deal? We'll never know. But there was definitely a lot of wounded feelings. Clay never liked Jackson. Jackson never liked Clay. Jackson despised John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams despised Jackson. So he refuses to attend Jackson's inauguration. Right. So if you're wondering, might our current president refuse to attend the next president's inauguration? There's a history of this. In fact, actually, John Quincy Adams' father, John Adams, refused to attend Jefferson's inauguration. So it ran in the family. John Quincy Adams is, up to this point in time, arguably the most sophisticated and urbane president. It was said that he could, write Greek while translating Latin. He went to Harvard, but he also spoke French, Dutch, Spanish, and Russian. So he had served when his father was abroad. He, at a very young age, he went with his father, John Adams, to France. He became very proficient in French, and actually served as his father's translator. He is later appointed as minister to Russia. He picks up Russian. He was also a religious person. And J.Q. Adams had a cousin named Hannah Adams, who wrote a 2-volume history entitled History of the Jews. One of the questions that most interested her was why Jews had never accepted Jesus. Let's say this was not exactly an unbiased work. And in fact, Hannah Adams goes on and is the founder of the, bit of a mouthful, the Female Society of Boston and Vicinity for the Promotion of Christianity Among the Jews, among whose subscribers and supporters was John Quincy Adams. It was his cousin. I mean, not that this informed his public views, but he did contribute to this organization that ostensibly was devoted to propagating Christianity among Jews. It was during Adams' presidency that Mordecai Emanuel Noah, whom we've already met, put his scheme into motion for creating that Jewish homeland on Grand Island in the Niagara River. J.Q. Adams actually does visit. In his correspondence, there is no mention of Ararat. But he did visit the site many years later after his presidency. In 1843, apparently it was something of a local curiosity that if you went to see Niagara Falls and whatever other things there were, you stopped to go see Grand Island, and this big stone monument that's still there in Hebrew and English, dedicating Ararat as a refuge for the Jews. John Quincy Adams only serves one term. He is defeated by Jackson in 1828. He goes home to Quincy, Massachusetts. He's the only president actually to have had a political career after his presidency. He's elected as congressman from his district in 1831, and he serves in Congress in the House for 7 consecutive terms. In fact, he is still a congressman when he dies in 1848. He becomes an increasingly outspoken critic of slavery. You may have seen the movie Amistad. Right? It was a Spielberg film. I think it was made in the late 90s, which is based on, it's a true story about this Spanish ship carrying slaves, and the slaves mutiny and take over the ship, and they are then captured by a naval vessel, and are imprisoned in New Haven and put on trial. The slave trade had already been banned, so it was not clear whether they could be tried for piracy and rebellion, or that they should be, because they were innocently and illegally taken as slaves. J.Q. Adams serves as their lawyer, and he gets them acquitted, even though 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices at the time were all slave owners. So, but that's a true story. And he dies in 1848. while he's still serving in Congress. And let me stop here before we get to Andrew Jackson. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Rabbi, that movie came out the same year as Titanic, and it was
Okay.
for Best Picture.
Okay. I saw both a long time ago. I honestly like Amistad better.
So did I. It was an amazing, amazing movie.
Right. Anthony Hopkins plays a really good John Quincy Adams. Remember that. Other comments, thoughts, questions about our first three presidents tonight? Madison, Monroe, J.Q. Adams. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Dr. Cantor.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question about your Shabbat Devar. You talked about Noah and about Abraham, and you gave a comparison. And you brought out that Noah, when he was told about the flood, he really didn't care about everyone else. He wanted to save himself and his family. Whereas Abraham, when he was told about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, actually, okay, with that. Okay, given that, and then
Yeah.
after that is the Akedah, given that Abraham negotiated with God for Sodom and Gomorrah, when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, why did he negotiate with him?
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer, but if you tune in Thursday morning, I do Parshat Shavua, and I'd be happy to answer that question. But I'm going to stick with
Okay.
the U.S. presidents and the Jews right now, and but I'd be happy to talk with you more about it. But if you're free, Thursday mornings at 9:30. That is when we do Parshat Shavua. So let me go on with Andrew Jackson. You can't imagine a more different, diametrically opposite man. John Quincy Adams was refined, cultured, traveled, spoke many languages. Whereas Jackson was rough-hewn, volatile, self-made, not particularly eloquent or educated, very stubborn, very opinionated. If you were a friend of Jackson, you were a friend for life. You were an enemy of Andrew Jackson, you were an enemy for life. He was very loyal to his friends and very bitter toward his enemies. He wasn't a strong churchgoer, but he was a strong believer in God, and he regularly read the Bible. Now, as far as Jews go, I mean, he was actually had a lot of respect for Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte, of course, the pirate, Jean Lafitte. Lafitte was a descendant of Sephardic Jews. They were conversos. They were, coerced into conversion at some point, way back when. But it's said that he maintained a covert loyalty to his Jewish faith. I don't know whether Jackson looked at Lafitte as a Jew or not, but he was enormously helpful at one of the high points in Jackson's life, and that was during the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812. Actually, unbeknownst to everybody, the war was already over. Treaty of Ghent had been signed in Europe, but boats were real slow, so nobody knew about it. Years after the battle, Jackson would praise Lafitte as one of the ablest men during the battle. He also had intelligence that he had collected that enabled them to get a better fix on what the British were up to. Not many direct contacts between Jackson and Jews, as far as we can tell. But we know that the Democratic Party paid at least lip service to Manuel Mordechai Noah, right, who was a force in Democratic politics, and awarded our friend Mordechai Manuel Noah several patronage jobs as a customs collector in New York. That was a plum patronage job. as well as a surveyor and sheriff. It's also Jackson that promotes Uriah P. Levy from lieutenant to commander. So it's under Jackson's during his tenure that that appointment is passed and approved by the Senate. I don't know how promotions are done. Obviously, it doesn't go through the president in the same way as it once did, but that is something that Jackson does. A couple of things that go on that Jackson isn't directly involved with, but during his administration, the Supreme Court of South Carolina. Now, this just also gives you kind of an idea of where the nation is, and things that would strike us as, really as having, a tin ear, didn't seem to bother people in those days. So the Supreme Court of South Carolina upholds the conviction of a fellow named Alexander Marks of Charleston, Jewish guy. Why? Because he keeps his store open on Sunday. Blue laws. Now, he had argued that his Sabbath was on Saturday, and therefore forcing him to close on Sunday was a violation of his religious freedom, and that therefore then the local law contradicted the Constitution. The Supreme Court of South Carolina didn't buy it. In 1831, in another state Supreme Court decision in Pennsylvania, apparently court cases took place on Saturday, never on Sunday, and an observant Jew who wouldn't be in court on Saturday, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decided that the case could go ahead, even though the defendant wouldn't be there, because court was open for business. So the fact that it was Shabbos for him didn't pass any muster. It would be hard to see that happening today. However, we do have a speech that Congressman Richard Mentor of Kentucky made. He would later be vice president under Van Buren, who took exception to the rulings, saying, hey, the Constitution, this is what he wrote: the Constitution regards the conscience of the Jew as sacred as that of the Christian, and gives no more authority to adopt a measure affecting the conscience of a solitary individual than that of a whole community. So that brings us up to Martin Van Buren. Jovial kind of guy. He didn't have Jackson's charisma, though. He had the misfortune of coming into office. He had been Jackson's VP and really was handpicked by Jackson. But he took office in 1837, just as an economic depression was coming into play. He wasn't responsible for it, but when you're president, you get the claim and the blame. It's certainly debatable the extent to which a president, can give himself the credit for an economic boom. There are a lot of things that come into play. But by the same token, maybe because presidents get blamed when the economy goes south, even when it's not their fault, they claim credit when, when it's not their doing either. But in any event, 900 banks close, countless of unemployed workers. We don't know how many. We know statistics. He is the first New Yorker, not New York City resident, but upstate New Yorker, to hold the office of the presidency. He was born in just south of Albany, Kinderhook. You can go visit his home. I've been there. It's about a 30-minute ride south of the state capital at Albany. In 1840, now he is the first president that actually has a crisis involving Jews in a foreign country. Up until this point, our presidents have had individual correspondence, relations with Jews, appointed Jews to this office or that, Uriah P. Levy, appointing him as lieutenant or commander. But this is the first time that there is actually an international issue. In 1840, there is an accusation of ritual murder leveled against the Jewish community in Damascus, Syria, right, which is part of the Ottoman Empire. There is a Franciscan priest, I've forgotten his name, who disappears, ostensibly while he's walking in the direction, heading in the direction of the Jewish quarter. The French consul in Damascus is a rabid anti-Semite. And so he levels the charge that the Jews killed the priest and, did whatever they do with priests for ritual purposes. A search is made of the Jewish quarter in Damascus. Nothing is found. But under the influence of the French consul, a Jewish barber and several prominent members of the community are arrested by the Ottoman gendarmes, and they're tortured. And of course, they confess. And a total of 13 individuals are held, and there's pressure put on the Sultan to order their execution. Now, there are protest rallies in London and Paris. Here in the US, there are rallies being held to save these poor innocent Jews in Damascus, in New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Cincinnati. Cincinnati is, a growing city at this point. Savannah, Richmond, in a half dozen places around the country. Van Buren directs his Secretary of State to issue a condemnation of the Damascus affair and instructs State Department personnel in Damascus to lend whatever help is practical to exert pressure, diplomatic pressure, to release these poor, Jews. Ultimately, 9 of the 13 are released and pardoned unconditionally by the Sultan. 4 die in jail. Horrible, abysmal condition. So 4 of them die in jail. The 9 that survive are released. It's hard to say that Martin Van Buren's action, was what ultimately made the difference, but it is the first time that a United States president takes a stand on a matter affecting the Jewish community, the Jewish people abroad. And that makes it, pretty notable. 2 more presidents for tonight, and then we'll call it an evening. William Henry Harrison. I love William Henry Harrison. Why? Because his most noteworthy achievement is that he delivered the longest inaugural address of any president. You think my sermons are long? He spoke 1 hour and 40 minutes at his inauguration. You can be thankful. 1 hour and 40 minutes. But he had the shortest presidential term. He died after 31 days in office. Longest inaugural address, shortest term of office. It's said that because he delivered such a long inaugural address and refused to wear a coat, it was early March in Washington. Inaugurations in the 19th century were in March, not January. But that he caught, a cold that turned into pneumonia. So I guess long-winded speeches, can get you. But he was a popular war hero. He was the general that won at the Battle of Tippecanoe during the War of 1812. So if you've ever heard, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, Tyler was the vice president. He is the first Whig to serve as president. Harrison rather. has a relationship with a number of Jews earlier in his career, from the time that he's in what we call the Old Northwest, not the Pacific, but the Old Northwest in the early decades of the 19th century meant, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan. That was the Old Northwest. He was on very good terms with a fellow named John Hayes, a Jewish fur trader, who was appointed by Madison as a revenue collector for the Illinois Territory, first Jew living in Illinois. Jacob de la Mata. De la Mata was an interesting fellow. When Congregation Beth Elohim in Savannah became Reform, he broke away. He didn't like the Reform practices, so he formed a traditional congregation, Shereth Israel, in the early 1840s. He was a fellow Whig with Harrison. He ran for Congress, lost, but because he was a political kindred spirit, he was appointed to federal office. He was the receiver general for South Carolina. It was like a controller's position, but it's the federal government collecting money from the state and dispersing federal money within the state. That was his job. Mordechai Emanuel Noah, I remember our friend, he's still going. He's the editor of the New York Evening Star in the early 1840s. He actively campaigns for Harrison, and he gets a federal judgeship as a plum for his support. The last interesting thing about Harrison and the Jewish connection is that he's obviously the first president to die while in office. He's also the first president to be eulogized in print by Jewish clergy. So Isaac Leeser, who is the spiritual leader of Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia, writes a pamphlet entitled Commemoration of the Life and Death of William Henry Harrison. So it's the first published eulogy of a president by a Jewish clergyman. Copies of the original, I don't know if they're in any, if they're held in Mikveh Israel, but the Library of Congress has one. So he has succeeded our friend Harrison after his 31-day term in office by John Tyler. So first time that a vice president succeeds a president. There's an interesting figure that about a third of the descendants of Jews who live in the US in 1840, right, the grandchildren of those who had lived, Jews who had lived through the American Revolution, had abandoned Judaism. Some had converted, maybe by Hannah Adams, for all we know. But about a third just weren't practicing Judaism at all. Right? A good example of this would be something like Judah P. Benjamin, who ends up, being a senator from Louisiana, never denied his Jewish roots, but practiced nothing, married a Catholic woman. His children were raised as Catholic. David Levy, Yulee, he's a first senator from Florida. He had actually converted to become Episcopalian. But these are people who had, were Jewish by birth, but had, abandoned all connection with Jewish life. So about a third. What makes a difference, of course, is that we're on the cusp of a whole wave of immigration from Central Europe in the 1840s, particularly from Germany. Tyler was very supportive of the Jewish community. In one of his first speeches, he wrote, "The Hebrew, persecuted and downtrodden in other regions, takes up his abode among us, with none to make him afraid." It's an echo of George Washington, quoting Micah, right? "Living under your fig and vine tree with none to make him afraid. Such is the great experiment which we have tried. and such are the happy results which have resulted from it. Our system of free government would be imperfect without it. Tyler had a warm correspondence with Jacob Ezekiel, a Jewish communal leader in Richmond, to whom he echoed his belief in the total separation of church and state. Those were his words, Tyler's words. And our friend Uriah Phillips Levy will make yet another appearance. This is he's now a commander. After a cabin boy on the ship that he is commanding, the USS Vandalia, a broken down ship that the Navy just didn't like Levy. They gave him a broken down ship, which he put into top shape in 5 months. But a cabin boy did something wrong, and though the naval regs of the time said that for such an offense you needed to be flogged, he refused to flog the boy. Instead, found some other penalty that he thought was worthier and might actually, teach him to do better. But of course, for the failure to order a flogging, Levy was yet again court-martialed for dereliction of duty. He was dismissed from the Navy because he didn't flog this poor kid. So President Tyler, again, reviews the naval court's record, and he sets aside the record. However, because the Navy brass is grumbling, he does instead allow Levy he is suspended without pay for a period of a number of months. But here's the rub. While he is suspended from duty without pay, President Tyler promotes Levy to captain. The only higher rank that existed in the Navy at the time was Commodore, and you had to actually command a squadron of ships, which is what happens with Levy. He does become a Commodore, and he is still on duty, not active duty, when the Civil War breaks out. He's not assigned to, he's already pretty elderly, but he is still in the Navy and on the list in 1862. Which is when he dies. So what happens to John Tyler? Well, he has one term in office. And, he is a Virginian. After the Confederacy is formed, in a last-ditch effort, he is asked to mediate some kind of compromise between North and South. It fails. And he comes back to Virginia and urges secession. Right, so he's a former president of the United States, but he urges secession, and he gets elected to the Confederacy's House of Representatives. But he dies, also in 1962, before he can take his seat. And that's the end of Tyler of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Okay. So let me stop here. Next time around, we'll go through, we'll get to see James Polk and Zachary Taylor and Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, and of course, most important, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. But comments, questions, thoughts?
Man,
Go ahead, Manny.
Yeah, I see this as being recorded. How do we access the recording at a later date? We won't be here in a couple of weeks. So,
You send an envelope with a money order with at least 4, maybe 5 digits. So you should be able on the synagogue's YouTube channel. These all should be posted.
just go to YouTube /
Well, Jacksonville
Jewish
Jewish
Center.
Center, if you go to YouTube and then, yeah, you should be able to get it there. I'll make sure Jennifer puts it up, but it is being recorded for sure.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I saw somebody else, raising,
You have questions?
John and Helen.
Yeah, I'll let you ask yours first.
I was just curious what Van Buren's religious background was, if you knew.
That's a good question. I'd have to look. I'd have to look that up. He certainly, took a, was it so politically expedient in 1840? Well, there were maybe 15,000 Jews, 20,000. Not more than that. I think he, I don't think it was a religious belief as much as it was, hatred for tyranny and persecution. And the idea that you would persecute people just because of their religion, not to mention, torture and deprivation of all due process. But I don't know, what faith denomination he belonged to.
I'll look it up too, Rabbi, but with that Dutch name, I'm suggesting the Dutch Reformed Church, likely.
Could be.
Could be.
There were plenty of Dutch Reformed church worshipers. Even the name of the town he grew up in, Kinderhook, is
Kinderhook.
probably a Dutch name.
Yeah, according to Google, that's what it is.
Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
there you go.
One comment on Jackson, just as and it's a small fact, but he almost became the first president to be assassinated. Almost.
Yes. Jackson was could be a violent guy. He was in a duel earlier in his career, and of course he also killed his opponent. Maybe that's why I liked Uriah Levy. They both were good shots. But in fact, Jackson, when he shot the guy, he himself was shot. He carried a bullet in his chest for the rest of his life after that. And then, yes, while he was president, there was a fellow who tried to assassinate him.
He misfired.
The gun didn't fire, misfired, and old Hickory
Went after with a cane.
yes, he took on his assailant.
You need to mute that.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Sure. Any other questions, comments?
No, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Sure. Sure. One of the things as I was looking at some of the, by the way, if you're interested, it's fascinating, even the liner notes. There was an album recorded. The Smithsonian Museum has a project of collecting American music called Folkways. And, I downloaded for $9, $9.99. And there are all of these campaign songs from as far back as 1789 for every presidency. And you really, and some of them are pretty. I didn't play you the one from Van Buren. Nasty stuff. So we think that presidential campaigns, that this was, watching that first debate and everybody's wincing. That may be, a little more, at least in the 19th century. They didn't have debates, and presidents didn't campaign. They stayed at home. But the nastiness between the followers of one candidate and the other could be, it could descend to some real depths. But so Oscar Brand is the musician, and presidential campaign songs from 1789 all the way up through Clinton. I don't think he goes past Clinton, but he goes up to Clinton. And all of these campaign songs, they're all popular ditties, because you wanted something that people knew and could sing, and then they would put these, genius lyrics and fit them to the songs that people already knew.
Mark Russell.
He didn't do.
He didn't do Camp
that was
Crystal.
parody.
Like we do to a Dodo Lum.
A little bit, yes, but we don't put nasty.
No,
you know,
but we do the same thing with
we
the
take melodies and
melodies. and
right.
do-
Yes, we do. It's true.
That's good.
All right. So
Where's Judy?
we'll stop with
Judy was
with
walking.
John Tyler
Can't get her on.
and keep going next time out and focusing mostly on Lincoln. I wish everybody a great week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Go team.
Rabbi.
And,
Thank you. Come on, Judy was walking.
Thank
Hail
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Interesting.
You